Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Duckman TV. So, got special guest, former head of New South Wales Rugby. So, he's the man in the know, New Zealand Rugby, Welsh Rugby, looked after the English Olympics Games sort of campaign thing. So, he might have an opinion about this Commonwealth Games thing we're going through in Australia too. David Moffett. David, thank you very much for your time this morning. Appreciate it. Coming from the beautiful, warm, sunny Christchurch on your farm,
Yeah,
and you told me it's going to snow. So in the next couple of
yeah,
days.
mate. I wish it was. We've had a bucket full of rain for the last couple of months, which is fairly. That's why it's so green over here most of the time, I guess. But we're due to get some snow in the next couple of days, so might not get down as low as us, but we've got some mountains around us, so that'll be covered. Well, why don't we start off with the Commonwealth Games, seeing as
Yeah.
you've praised it?
Oh,
I mean,
100%. So Dan Andrews is pulled up stumps on it. So for anyone who doesn't know, and said he doesn't want to host the Commonwealth Games now in Victoria, and it's due to the cost. So apparently, there's an associated cost of 2.6 billion. But I don't know how that's an appealing factor to get the games. And then now he rolls on, and he said they're pulling out because cost blowout is taken at 7.5 billion. So number one, how is there such a big cost blowout? And number two, Victoria have a lot of infrastructure already. Why would you be building more infrastructure and stadium setups when you could use existing stuff?
well, from what I understand, he'd promised a lot of the region some infrastructure investment, obviously looking for votes. I mean, don't get me going on Andrews, mate. We'll have another we'll have another conversation on politics anytime you like. He is an absolute bloody disgrace, that guy. But to be fair, it looks to me like the only countries now capable of hosting the Commonwealth Games or even interested are Australia and the UK. And I think on that basis, one's got to question the future of these games. I mean, in this day and age, I know that there are a lot of athletes that do well at the Commonwealth Games that really struggle in the Olympics. But I think you've really got to question its validity these days. And I can see the writing on the wall going forward. I believe the Gold Coast have said they'll pick it up. Well, they only just had the Commonwealth Games not so long ago. And
2018.
yeah, 2018, and they've got a bit of infrastructure there, although they may have sold off the athletes' village as units or something. I don't know what they did with that, but if they want to host it, good luck to them. But I think that, and you've got to cap the amount of money that you expect to have to pay to host them, and because otherwise nobody's going to put their hand up. I mean, New Zealand couldn't afford to host them. I think the last time they had the Commonwealth Games here was 1986, I think, something like
Yep.
that. I'm not even sure. No, maybe even earlier than that, here in Christchurch, and you know or instead of a city hosting the Commonwealth Games, perhaps a country could host it, and move the bits around or something like that. I don't know, mate.
I
I
think
don't
it'd be
run.
a more intelligent approach than lump and dump all in one place, all in one hit. I don't think that works anymore. And like I said, it's become unaffordable now because the Commonwealth Games not really for Australia. It's like to promote sport in emerging nations, developing nations, third world countries. That's what it's surely got to be. Although what it is Australia effectively are like the big boys in the schoolyard bullying the little countries because we're just a class above. Should we even be in it? I know we're eligible to be in it, but what do we get out of it? Getting 100 gold medals? What's the point of that?
Yeah, I don't know, and I'm not quite sure of the relevance of the Commonwealth as such any longer. I know the previous Queen was very, very keen. I'm not sure if there's the same appetite for it, and therefore for the games themselves. They used to be called the Empire Games way
Yep.
back in time. It's no longer a British Empire, as you know. So, yeah, I think we've got more interesting things to get onto than the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, that's right. So talking about the Queen, she had an unfortunate passing since we chatted last time as well. You were born in Zimbabwe. What do you think of the appointment of, well, it's obvious follow through, King Charles there? So is there relevance still with the royal family in Australia and New Zealand and the British Commonwealth as such these days?
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, I was born in Yorkshire and I was raised in Kenya. I've got a pretty good knowledge. I can speak still fairly fluently Swahili,
Oh,
and
really?
that's not only when I'm pissed either, mate. Um, Look, yeah, I think the monarchy has got relevance. Certainly in the UK. I mean, it brings in billions of pounds in tourism. When people go there to go and do what they do, and when they have their big pageants, it's a big deal.
Yep.
I, I I'm not sure about how long the monarchy will last as being the head of state for Australia and New Zealand. There is obviously a move towards, a Republican model. That worries me in somewhere like Australia and the sort of idiots that we'll get being the president, with all the power. If you think about, let's not get onto politics, but that's what worries me about ditching the system that we have at the moment. I think of the two countries, most likely New Zealand would still have a greater affinity with the monarchy, perhaps, than Australia.
Yes.
And that's because I think over here they're a little bit more connected with the UK than in Australia. I always classify the two as Kiwis are, a bit pretty much more the way this is set up, and much more like the English, and Australians are much more like the Yanks. Just in their overall attitude and their big view about the world and all that sort of thing. Whereas Kiwis are pretty much an introverted, bunch of people, really.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary too. So what got us, we'll get on to what got us here having a chat now is you did a post a couple of weeks ago and messaged me when I replied on the post about the under-20s Rugby World Cup. So it's pretty obvious Australia are struggling at the moment. So they got Eddie Jones back after he was, some people say, unceremoniously sacked from English rugby. You can only be there for so long, and if you don't get any more out of the bucket, well, you're not going to be there for very long. I think we shafted Dave Rennie, even though we brought Eddie Jones back. What did you make of the under-20s Rugby World Cup? Obviously, his appointment doesn't directly influence that, but he's got some sort of say as a head coach on the philosophy of what the sides underneath him are going to be doing.
Oh yeah, I think he's got much bigger problems in the under-20s at the moment. It's the national team, I think, is a major issue. And the headline, Eddie is doing the job that he's been brought in to do, which is to get as many headlines for rugby as he can, right? And coming out and saying that the New Zealand ought to watch out. I think is it being played tonight down in Melbourne or something?
Yeah.
I don't know really, mate. I've got no idea when the games are being played and who's playing really, other than I know about that one. But I mean, he's been here before. He's got a very limited shelf life with the teams that he coaches. I'm not saying he's not a good coach. I think Eddie. I used to referee him when he played for Randwick, and he's when I say I used to referee him, I think he was the referee and I just ran around with the whistle.
So he's trying to tell you what to do. So that doesn't sound like Eddie. I met him the other week at Briar's lunch, and he has that persona. So he's the big character in the room.
Yeah, he is. He is. Whether that's going to translate into success with the Wallabies, I don't know. I mean, I just don't think they have the depth at the moment. But getting back onto the under-20s, I think the Southern Hemisphere did extremely badly in South Africa in the under-20 Rugby World Cup. Well, it's not a Rugby World Cup. I think it's a championship, isn't it? New Zealand did worse than Australia. Australia beat New Zealand. I'm not sure. I've never been sure how many of the under-20s actually make it through to the national team. Largely because I think a lot of other players who ply their trade in the hustle and the bustle of club rugby and then provincial rugby come in and are much better players for doing that. Whereas the under-20s these days are mollycoddled beyond belief. You know, they go into these academies, you know, where everything is done for them, and there's no, you know, they're not playing good hard rugby, and that's what they need to be playing. So yeah, I doubt very much whether any of the under-20s from either New Zealand or Australia, perhaps even South Africa, will make it all the way through. There will be some, obviously, but not many. So one's got to ask what is happening in those countries with the high performance unit, and what are they actually doing to identify and bring players forward, other than putting them through interminable bloody coaching courses and camps and all that sort of thing, when they should actually be going and playing for Briars perhaps and getting the shit kicked out of them. You know, I mean, or obviously they, you know, those players won't be playing for Briars or colleagues or any of the other subbies teams, but they can go and play for their clubs, and they can go up against some bloody cynical hard rugby players, and that's what they're going to meet when they get into the real world.
Well, so that's what I see. So there's a fair discord. Speaking to a couple of teachers last night that are involved in public school system over here, and they've told me they've got a big problem because New South Wales Rugby don't, number one, they don't see a problem. So that's part of the problem. Number two, GPS, the GPS system and private school system, it's set up so that it's rated that highly. Effectively, they consider it to be a higher level than the shoot shield and all this. So you've gone through those systems, you can get into the Waratahs next gen blue squads and all this sort of stuff and evolve from that. Not have played against anybody out of your age bracket, then next thing you know, you're in the Waratahs or nearly in the Wallabies squad. And then that's the first time you come up against men and wonder why there's such a massive discord between the public and that, and why these guys are getting blasted off the park. It's pretty obvious. If you're not playing against older, better people, well, you're not developing your skills to that level.
Well, I went to a GPS school in Brisbane Boys College. My son went to Shaw, and you know, that was during the real halcyon days of Australian rugby. But the whole sporting scene in GPS schools has changed dramatically. No longer do you have a choice between playing rugby and cricket and basketball. Now there's so many other sports to play, and they're taking over. And the point that I would make about the GPS schools, if the Waratahs and Australia were relying on GPS schools, well, then they'd most likely be seen as an emerging nation by now, right? Because the thing that is saving Australian rugby is the Pacific Islanders. You have a look at an Australian team now, it's chock-a-block full of Pacific Islanders, you know, and some of those will get scholarships to go to GPS schools. But you know, a lot of the others don't. You know, they come up the hard way. You know, they come up playing. I mean, they should be coming up through the system in the western suburbs, but you know, as we know, the western suburbs has only got one really decent team, and they're doing quite well this year. I noticed. You know, the two Blues. Which is really good for rugby out in the western suburbs. But what they need to concentrate on the western suburbs, not the bloody eastern seaboard. But without those Pacific Islanders, where would Australian rugby be today?
I think Australian rugby. So I think the world rankings tell us we're rated 7th or 8th at the moment. I think you could see we could be half that again. We could be 16th or something like that, and down to a lower level. Like Japan are at a level now where potentially they're higher in development and world rankings than what Australia are. So that's not very good, because then you have to start qualifying to get to World Cups. But all the results indicate that's probably where it's at.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, as you know, I've got a very good friend, Robbie Deans, who's up in Japan and does a lot of fantastic work up there with the Saitama Wild Knights. And they're likely to be really competitive in about another 2 World Cups time. It's his view. It's not mine, because I'm not that close to it. But they are a coming nation. The other thing too is that recently World Rugby changed the eligibility criteria, so that you're now going to get some pretty decent island teams appearing at the World Cup. We've got Tonga and Samoa, getting the use of players, and that should have always been the case. I mean, to deny a player who might have played 2 games for the All Blacks from playing for his country of origin, it was a disgrace, actually, and they finally changed it. And I tend to think that would be because they would be facing another bunch of lawsuits if they didn't change it. And so they did, which is good. Bit too late in my view, but you watch some of these teams go at the World Cup, and they might not be that 100% successful this year, but they're coming, the island teams, right? And they, a lot of, and we'll stop this warehousing of players that the New Zealand particularly and Australia have been guilty of. I mean, especially in New Zealand, where they would pick an island player, you might play 1 or 2 tests, that's it. And then you'd never hear from them again, but they were out of the test series, out of the test arena. Excuse me. So that's all changed, which is really good. But I think, look, it's easy to focus on Australia and New Zealand because that's what I know more about than anything else. But rugby in general is in real deep doo-doo right around the world. And not only the way the game's being played at the moment, although we've seen some attempt at changing the way they're playing the game, but it doesn't work in the end, because they'll just revert to defense. And why do they do that? They don't want to lose. Coaches don't want to lose because they don't want to lose their extremely highly paid jobs these days. And I put most of the blame at the way the game's played at the moment at the feet of the coaches. The players go out there, and more so these days, they're robots. They're just told, you play by numbers. In the 53rd minute and 30 seconds, you have to do X, Y, and Z. So it takes all of that flair, guile, the stuff that Wales used to be so bloody brilliant at, takes it out of the game.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shame.
And Australia in the early 80s to play that in New Zealand did, the All Blacks too, but they have become very textbook methodical at the moment. So this is the system we're going to defend. It's the system we're going to play. This is what you need to do at every breakdown. But do this for 90% of the game and we'll win the game. So literally it's a game of attrition at the moment. If you have the ball more than the other team, take penalty goals when they're on offer, you're probably going to win the game. So you might not even need to score tries or not many tries.
No, I mean, I refer to it as McDonald's rugby. So when you go into a McDonald's, it doesn't matter where you go, which town, which city, which country, it's all the same, right? Yeah. You know what you're going to get. And it's the same with rugby. They're all playing McDonald's rugby, which is no matter where you go, they all want to play the same bash and kick game. Except for perhaps when you get 2 New Zealand teams playing each other, or New Zealand. I mean, the test, I haven't been watching any rugby, but I decided to watch the first half of the All Blacks in the Box the other night. Well, I watched the first half. I was going to watch the second half. The first half was a brilliant exhibition of rugby by the All Blacks. Half time, the Box come out and they sorted out some of their defensive issues, and New Zealand went back into their shell. Boring rugby, and I couldn't watch it, so I turned it off. And I think that's the problem. You know, they're given a license to thrill, a license to play an open, expansive game until all of a sudden the other team work that out, and then they go back into their shell. And you know, I suppose that's the way it's gone, and fair enough, if that's the way they want to play it. But with the game in so much trouble, one would be thinking that they actually they need to understand what business they're in. And this is the players as well. They aren't in the business of playing rugby. They're in the business of entertainment.
Yeah.
And they get paid an awful lot of money, a lot more money than a lot of people who actually do entertain you, you know, on television or wherever it is. And that's where people go these days. If you're not going to get entertained in 2023, you're going to say, well, bugger that for a joke. I'm not going to watch that anymore. I've actually spent my time and my dollars wanting to be entertained. And too many of these people that are involved in the game don't understand that.
Yeah. So the game you've developed an 11-a-side game as well. And I can tell you now more than ever. So being involved, I've gone back and coaching at Blacktown this year in Division 5 subbies, rebuilding at the club. And I can just see need something in the levels below coming through. There's no filter. There's lots of juniors. They're not filtering through to seniors. Why that's happening, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Like I'm trying to do a bit of a survey to get information why the players not come to either our club or somewhere else. There's like 20% maybe of the players keep on playing after the age of 17 into seniors. Some might come back in the future, but they're not just continuing on. It's like there's just a breakdown there, but I don't know how or why. So, and I think more than ever,
Well, Duck, man, there's so many other things for them to do these days, right?
Yeah.
And you know, they've got to go and train, and then they've got to go and play, and then it's, you know, the way the game's played, and it's, you know, quite often not safe any longer. So you're right. I mean, I developed, and Robbie Deans has been very involved in last 4 years, I suppose. He's using it up in Japan, for these second tier players who mostly train. They never get to play much, so they're using 11s. And it's a game which is based on safety, simplicity, speed, and you know, and there's only 11 players on the field. And one of the most, you know, and there was some really good footage of a game that was played towards the end of their season in Japan. And one of the overriding views from people who've seen that, and it's on my YouTube site, is that it looks, you had to actually count the players to realize that it wasn't a game of 15-a-side rugby, other than the fact that there was a lot of movement. There were, you know, all the things that we brought into the 11s actually is now starting to work really well. The biggest issue for me is that World Rugby must see it as a threat, because their view is, oh, we don't need anything else. I mean, they are incredibly dumb. You know, they've got over 250 people work in their offices in Dublin. I'm not sure what they bloody well do, to be perfectly honest with you. But, oh, well, no, we don't need anything else. And we're certainly not going to involve anything to do with David Moffett, because I ruffle their feathers, and I don't mind doing that. But they are so, I don't know, they just navel gaze all the time, instead of saying, well, you know, we got a bit of a problem here. You take Australia, for example. If they used 11s, and I think I might have said this to you before, in the old competition, the Waratah Shield, which used to involve all of the state schools.
Yeah.
Right? If they used 11s in that bloody competition, then you would most likely be able to pick up some players who would normally go to league, go to rugby union. And it would be it's played over 4 quarters of 11 minutes. You most likely get more, in that period of time, you would get more ball in play time than you would in a full 80 minutes of 15s rugby. But it looks like 15s. You know, you've got proper scrums, proper lineouts, proper everything, but you just got more space to operate in. So that means that if you've got big lumbering guys in 15s who, get lots of breaks and all that sort of stuff, and really just have it, people with skill can actually create some space and run those guys around. So then that evens up the game from between the defense and attack. But they're a law unto themselves, World Rugby, and I've given up with them, to be perfectly honest with you. And it's just a matter of continuing to work away with guys like Robbie Deans to see if we can get some buy-in.
Yeah. So I actually think there is a fair level of opportunity in New South Wales, because they're frustrated. The teachers that are involved with rugby and trying to do rugby programs, they're frustrated, and they've told me they have to get involved in rugby league if they want to get rugby going, because they've got to try to pick some perhaps like-minded people to do something, so that where they might be able to find some talents that come in between. That makes it a tough sell, trying to get people that are playing multiple sports, dual sports or triple sports, so might be involved in basketball or AFL as well. And AFL have a huge footprint on the ground in New South Wales in particular, and are proactively trying to take on everything else.
So the other thing about 11s rugby is you only need 11 players plus whatever number. You need 3 front rowers and then whatever, or else you just go to uncontested. 3 front row replacements, or else you go to uncontested scrums, which is no biggie, to be perfectly honest with you. But it's got to be easier to find teams of that size instead of having to find 23 players to play the game. And and wherever you go, Wales, in Wales, for example, they've got huge problems down the lower grades over there with them cancelling games because they can't get enough players. Because players are going, well, I'm not going to turn out in this bloody miserable winter weather, and then go and get myself flogged by 100 points. But you talk to them over there. I've said I'd go over there and I'd help them get it going. Yeah. And that, because it means them having to do something, Duckman. It means somebody having to get off their bloody backside and actually do something, rather than sitting there thinking, oh, it's all okay, it'll be all right in the night.
Yeah.
And it won't.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, what did you think? So Alan Gilpin's the current CEO of World Rugby. Do you think he's sitting on his hands a bit? So look, he has made one good decision. So bringing back the island, the heritage thing. So how it works is that if they're not picked in the first 15 in the country where they might have played at, good examples is Barrow Falau, no longer in the Wallabies. Well, he can come back and play for a country he recognises as being his heritage, which is Tonga. So, and like I said, it's going to bring back a flow of players into these island nations. That's going to make the competition stronger. One of the problems I've seen over the years is the IRB don't let that. So the money comes down to Ireland, England, Wales, Scotland, even Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, but they're not seeing it. Tonga, Fiji, Samoa, that money, the $30,000 a test match or whatever, that doesn't go down to them and all that sort of stuff. What happens there? What would that be happening?
You've most likely touched on a whole hour's program talking about World Rugby, mate. Because, as I said to you just a little earlier here, they've now got a staff of 250 plus people there. When I was on the IRB, I spent 7 years on the IRB as representative for New Zealand and then Wales. And they had a staff of around about 25, I think. And they did what they were supposed to do. They put on World Cup. Well, the very first thing they're supposed to do is sort out the laws of the game. They are the gatekeeper of the laws of the game. Appoint international referees, various things like that. But now they seem to think that they are a governing body where they need to do everything. Where they. This ridiculous situation where they've now moved the sevens to an elite 12 teams, and that they're going to be playing them in unique locations. And I read the other day where one of the tournaments is going to be played in Perth. You know, I'm fair dinkum, really? You know, New Zealand doesn't have it. New Zealand's not in it. And sure, they don't have a stadium like the Perth Stadium, which is just, I mean, I've been right around that stadium and it's fantastic. I
Yep.
admit that. But, you know, to make it so that New Zealand threw up their hands and said, oh, well, we can't be part of this, is just a disgrace. And for them to think that the way that they're going to run sevens is going to all of a sudden result in huge numbers of young people coming and playing the game, or playing the game of sevens, is just fallacy. Sevens is a bloody excuse for a piss up, mate.
Yeah.
You know, and it started in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And it's still the case. It's just a little festival of rugby. It's not going to get all those people in Perth in the stadium, in the stands up there, rushing out to play seven-a-side rugby. Not going to happen, but they think it will. And that's because you've got this Gilpin guy. I think he comes from IMG or somewhere like that. I don't know who you know has got this view about what rugby is. Rugby is a niche sport, Duckman. That's it.
Yep.
And it's a niche sport becoming even more niche as a result of the fall off in number of participants playing the game. Yeah, I mean, it's I know people will look at this and they'll listen to it and they'll say, here we go, Moffett's on his bloody soap box again and what have you. And it's only because I care.
Yeah.
You know, I actually care. I care more about the All Blacks than any other team because I ran New Zealand Rugby. And, you know, and I get out in the media when I think that I need to.
Yeah.
And, you know, I care about the game.
Yeah. So talking about World Rugby again and the state of what's happening. So there's a lot of trying to think what they are. So finance or bridging companies are now getting involved with want to have ownership of World Rugby. So World Rugby and international rugby teams. The biggest example is All Blacks. Now, like equity firms and that stuff. And the Wallabies are looking at doing, they've already sold off some. They're looking at doing more down the same model. Are we selling our soul by doing that?
Oh, absolutely. I was very critical of the Silver Lake deal with New Zealand Rugby. And in actual fact, I am aware that both Silver Lake and CVC are somewhat concerned about what they've got themselves into. I mean, if you take CVC, they pumped millions of pounds into the game in the UK, with the result that just about every club in the English Premiership are in financial trouble. 3 in 1 year have gone to the wall. And if the benefactors were to withdraw their funding, they would all go to the wall because they're trying to emulate football, and nothing will ever emulate football, the money, or, you know, American, you know, the NFL or anything like that. That's where the big money is. And as I said, we're a niche sport. So I despair, to be perfectly honest with you. But I can see the likes of CVC and Silver Lake looking at rugby and thinking, I think we might have made a bit of a mistake here, because they can't control it. CVC, I think they made a quick £3 billion when they bought and sold Formula One, right?
Yep.
And that, I think, gave them an appetite for sport. The problem is that when they had Formula One, they owned the entire sport, whole as bolts, everything. They could do whatever they wanted with it. They could, you know, just everything, because they owned the entire Formula One sport.
That's a massive problem, because you lose your identity all of a sudden.
Yeah, but they can't and they will not own the whole of rugby.
Yeah.
And even now, even with the investment they've got, they're finding out that in actual fact, the administration of rugby is so pathetic that they've put money into a system that they didn't fully understand. And I think they're reevaluating it. And it'll be very interesting to see where it lands, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah. So one place where you do get this private ownership thing, and it works pretty successfully, I think to the detriment of the game in some level, is like professional football. And talking about clubs like Manchester City, Manchester United, Real Madrid, so we can all resonate who they are. They have big $1 billion values and that stuff. They're also, a lot of these clubs now are hocked up to some fairly high levels because people have put money in, they want a return on investment. They're not going to let it go and just go, I'll just write those $2 billion off or put in over the years like the Glazers are doing at Manchester United. And that is that like sustainable? And is it an intelligent?
It's not intelligent, but it's likely to be sustainable in football because of the sheer size of the sport, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a Tottenham supporter since I was born. My family, we trace a family in Tottenham back to 1750. So, the entire family's always, since it became, a thing, always followed Tottenham. And they recently spent £1 billion building a new stadium. And they've had 20 managers in 20 years. And as we know, we've got Andrew Postecoglou as our manager, and it's going to be fantastic to see how he goes, because he's not one of these rant and ravers, bloody Italians and Spanish, Portuguese, or whatever, up and down the sideline and, getting themselves all bloody worked up and all that sort of thing. He's going to take a more considered view. He did brilliantly with Celtic. He won triple up there with them. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how he goes, because for him to have got that job is just amazing. But getting back to the nub of the question, is it sustainable? Tottenham's got a 70,000 waiting list for their annual memberships. 70,000. That's the entire stadium again waiting to get themselves and then United and all those big clubs will be in the same position.
Yeah,
that's why it's sustainable. It's not sustainable in Australia. They're just a feeder club, a feeder country to these big clubs, and same with New Zealand. But over there, mate, it's such big business. It is so popular. And it's not like that with most of the rugby grounds over there, around about 25,000 spectators.
Yeah.
You do the maths.
So I don't know how it breaks down. Like it's fairly strong in some of the places and got good numbers. So world football is unique. Ange Postecoglou is going to have some problems though, and the problems will all come from these people who put a lot of money in. They're impatient, so they want results quickly. I do reckon he'll get a fair crack at this, but I don't think if he puts Tottenham in a good position, he might not be there at the end of the season. And if they struggle a bit, if they're down lower than maybe eighth when it comes to Christmas time, he might be looking for a new job.
Well, it all depends on his roster. For a start, he's got to keep Harry Kane, right? That's critical. Who's got another year on his contract. And then he's got to be really, really smart with the people that he brings in. The biggest problem with Tottenham isn't so much the players, it's Daniel Levy, and the guy Enoch, he's a shareholder of Enoch, who's a guy that lives in the West Indies somewhere. He's obviously very wealthy. One would think he'd like to see a return on his investment. I can't see how he ever gets one through with Tottenham going the way they're going at the moment. They're not in Europe next year. And that's another big thing over there. I mean, if you can get into Europe, that's when the big paydays come. So, all that sort of stuff makes that game. You take a look at NFL, NFL has got the perfect model. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. 19 weeks, it's all over.
Yeah.
And then everybody's left wanting more. Yeah. Rugby at the moment, everybody's going, oh shit, not again. Not. There's never a break from it. There is never a break from rugby, and people are getting just bored with it. Whereas, I'm just so in awe of what the NFL do. Sure, they've got a quite a difficult to understand pool system, but it works for them. And the money in NFL is mind blowing for a 19-week competition, where if you look at it, they bought the whole thing lock, stock, and barrel, so that you don't see sponsorships all over the place. You think about it. There's no boards, there's no sponsors on the ground, there's nothing like that.
Yeah.
And I can tell you a little story about when we did the deal with News Limited, which was the beginning of Super Rugby and professional rugby. And in the meeting that we had with Sam Chisholm in his flat in London, where we're all sitting down. He's only a small guy, but he stood up. I mean, he was a presence, Sam Chisholm. And there's 5 of us doing this deal. And he said, we want to control everything. We want, we want it like the NFL. And we said, well, that's fine if you want to pay for it, because that's what they do there. Anyway, through all the discussions and the negotiations, we ended up with $555 million over 10 years. Think about that.
Yeah.
And we still kept the rights to sponsorships and the like.
Yeah.
So, and that was unbelievable amount of money that News Limited and Fox put into the sport. And then look at the way they were dealt with by Australian rugby.
Yeah.
And by New Zealand rugby.
They flitted the money away, like both, including like the whole Sansa, because you helped make Sansa, create Sansa. That's a lot of money. They basically, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia, you really have to wonder, what did they do with the money? Is rugby in a better position now after that deal happened? Was it in a better position when it ended than when it started? I'm not sure what it is, because I think they just kept on wanting to add more and more and more teams. Then it got to Super 18 or whatever it was, and that was like 2-tiered Super Rugby. And you were seeing games nearly like shoot shield clubs playing subbies clubs. There'd be like 80 to 5s and all this sort of. That's not good for rugby.
No, it's not. But once again, they went for quantity over quality.
Yeah.
Right. Whenever you do that, you suffer, because people aren't going to go and watch that rubbish. And that's the other issue that I raise that nobody else will raise, because they don't want to upset a few players. World Rugby's got too many professional teams in it now, and that's being proven by what's happening in the UK, potentially in France, if all of those benefactors were to get tired of sponsoring those teams in France. But everywhere else, I mean, the game's on its knees financially. And why? I can tell you why. Because most of the money has been spent on players, a very small percentage of players. And a lot of the players aren't good enough to be called professional rugby players. So what needs to happen in World Rugby terms is there needs to be a reset. There needs to be a reduction in the number of professional teams. Australia should go to 3 tomorrow, because they can't support 5 teams. And if I was a company like, well, who's got the rights, 9 or Stan or whoever it is, I'd be saying, mate, I want quality. I'd rather go for quality rather than quantity. Although that's a very funny discussion for them to be having, because they actually need quantity as well, right? The broadcasters. New Zealand should go to 4 teams. Then you got 7 teams, right? 3 teams from South Africa, and you've got a 10-team competition.
Yeah.
And you would see, go back to the old Super 12, and then a team from, perhaps a couple of teams from the Pacific Islands.
Yeah.
You would see some fantastic rugby, and you would see people turn back on. They'd go and watch it, and they would actually engage with it on television. In the UK, England, they should only have 10 teams. Wales should have 2. And they should invite Wales to take part in the English Premiership. They're just across the border. And everybody says, oh, no, but what? We can't. What about Scotland and Ireland? So what about Scotland and Ireland? Let them do what they want to do. You're looking at your own survival, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
England are too selfish to look at the wider picture up in the UK about what's happening around them and what's happening to themselves.
Yeah.
The whole thing needs to be made. 1995, the game went professional, right? And you asked a very good question just a minute or two ago. Is it any better now than it was? And no, it's not. It's a damn sight worse than those first few. You would remember those first few years of Super Rugby.
Yeah.
It was incredible rugby. Yeah, I got into a stoush with Phil Gould because he called it basketball on grass. And I responded by saying, well, it's better than 5-tackle kick, mate.
Yeah.
And then I ended up running the NRL. So you go figure. I mean, yeah. Sorry, mate. I'm doing a lot of talking, aren't I?
No, it's all right. No, I like hearing it. So the facts are, like, when we look at English rugby now, so I can't remember who the other clubs are that fell out. Worcester, Wasps, and who's the third
And the
one?
London Irish. London Irish.
Yeah, so London Irish. So were they sustainable in the first place? I would think not. Wasps are one of the steep with history in that, and spent too much money, blew their budget, and now they're gone to the wall. Will they ever come back? Someone like Wasps
Well,
in particular.
well, if they do, they've got to start at the bottom of the league pyramid in English rugby. And while they're doing that, they're not going to be getting the crowds, when they're playing the teams that they'll be playing. And once again, the whole fallacy of trying to follow the football model is laid bare, isn't it? With rugby clubs in England, it's the best example of them thinking that they were much bigger than they actually are.
Yeah.
That the sport is much more important than it actually is. It's essentially a private school sport in the UK as well.
Yeah.
It's not a working man's game there. Rugby league does that, for the working men who want to follow a rugby sport. And you have
Yeah.
a look at Australia. I mean, rugby league is going from strength to strength. I think they've been dumb as to increase the number of teams, and they're even talking about further increases. And we're seeing a competition which is two-tier competition now,
Yeah.
in the NRL, and it's going to get worse. There was I read an article the other day where they're talking about how difficult it is for teams that are struggling to attract players because there aren't the players. They're talking about number sevens in rugby league. Well, there aren't enough of them, so they're all being fought over by those clubs wanting to improve. But it's just I don't understand. If they were going to expand, they should have expanded into New Zealand and put a team here in the South Island, because you have a look, 55% of the players in the NRL are Pacific Islanders.
Yeah.
You could attract a lot of those back to New Zealand to play in another team here.
If they did that, I actually think they would create bigger problems for rugby in New Zealand. But it's a big logistical problem. You've got to look at how you manage it. So obviously the TV money that you helped bring into the game is fantastic, 555 million. So the TV model, the only problem is if these big TV companies like Channel 9 and that get tired of a game, the money you had for rugby then was way more than the equivalent of the $1 billion that Channel 9's got as a TV rights deal with the NRL now. So if you look at inflation and all this sort of stuff, all the professional sports, none of the professional sports are as good as what they were financially, are they, at the moment?
No, well, I would argue that the NFL and the big competitions in Europe, the Bundesliga, the English Premiership, the Serie A in Italy, Spain,
Champions League.
they've got big money, but they've got big money because they've got the eyeballs. The people
Yep.
want to go and watch it, and they also want to watch it on television. So oh, I don't know where rugby's going to end up, Duckman, to be perfectly honest with you, mate. I just
Yep.
don't know.
Yep. So I've got the Rugby World Cup coming up in France. You got tickets? You're on your way to Marseille and gonna get out and about, jet setting, and
No, I don't have tickets. And there's a little bit of a bleat from me. You won't hear me say this. But I spent 7 years on the IRB, right? Never ever asked for anything from World Rugby. And I got in touch with a guy who I'm quite friendly with, actually, at World Rugby, Bill Beaumont, and asked him if there was any possibility of me getting 2 tickets for the opening game between France and New Zealand. And deadly silence. So I'm not going. Um, so that's the lot of an ex CEO, mate. You know, your history really. Um, but putting that to one side, I think this Rugby World Cup is a sham because of the way in which they've done the draw. Two of the favourites for the Rugby World Cup will go out in the quarterfinals because of the way in which the draw has been mismanaged, because they drew the pools about 3 years ago or something, based
yeah,
on where they were then, right?
yeah,
So you've got all these top teams in one half of the draw, and all the other. I mean, Australia has got a huge opportunity of skating straight through their half of the draw,
to get to the
right?
semi-finals. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, if they don't get to the semi-finals, then Eddie Jones should be sacked, because they have got a dream draw.
yeah,
So has Wales. On the other half of the draw, you've got all these top teams belting the shit out of each other, and they're going to go out.
yeah.
You know, and it's not fair. You could end up with an accidental World Cup champion this year because they won't have got anywhere near playing against the better teams.
Yeah. Well, you've got at the moment Ireland are ranked number one side in the world, probably followed by France and South
Right.
Africa, or something like that. All Blacks were about four. All Blacks will think they're higher, but I've seen how everyone's playing at the moment. Their style doesn't indicate they're going to come second, but they've done it in the past, got the ability, so it could happen. But if they've bodged the draw up and got all these good sides into one side, that's going to be a big problem then. So that
Yep.
it may well be a tier two
Those
side that
top
wins the
four
World Cup.
teams, those top four teams are in one half of the draw. So come quarter-final time, if it was me, I'd be looking at the draw and saying, right, if we lose this game, will that put us in the other half of the draw?
Yeah. Well, that's what you're almost better off not winning your pool. Become
Exactly.
second, you drop into the other side of the draw. So you
Yeah,
think there
yeah.
might be a little bit of strategy and smoke and
No,
mirrors
no,
going on.
no, but I think that's what I'd be looking at.
Yeah. I'm kind of doing the same thing at the moment. So, coach of Blacktown was sitting eighth in the comp out of 11 in Division 5. So, done a decent rebuild at the moment. Got more to do. But the way the comp's structured, so first, second, third, and fourth play for the Jeffrey Cup, 5 to 8 play for the Meldrum Cup. I actually like my chances of having a chance of winning the comp. If we were in the top four, yeah, might have got blasted out in the first week. If we can come seventh, we actually get a bit of a soft game. So coming eighth is not bad, as long as seventh beats sixth, and then they'll usurp that, they'll change around a little bit above us, and all of a sudden, yeah, we get a bit of an easier draw
Well, mate,
ourselves to the
I can
finals.
I can remember when I played with Mossman that we played Blacktown. So Blacktown must have slipped an awful long way. That was a long time ago, obviously.
Yeah,
But it's good to see guys like yourself and others getting out there in the West, mate, because as long as you see guys like you that see the potential there, it doesn't really matter what New South Wales rugby does. I mean, they just all the administrators are interested in these days. The sexy end of the game, the professional end of the game, and they do a bloody massive job of stuffing that up.
yeah. So do you think they're too busy trying to get involved in the long lunches and invites to sports lunches and get Super Rugby tickets and all this sort of stuff. There seems to be a fair bit of that where there's people at the top end of the game, including players, that think the rugby owes them something.
Well, I've seen it in so many different countries and so many places. Guys on the boards, they're more interested in whether they've got a car park, where they're sitting at the lunch, and and whether they can travel business class to watch games. So
Yeah.
Sometimes I most likely come over as being very critical, and I am at times, but it's because I think a lot about where things are at, and it's not in a good place, and it's been a very big part of my life.
Yeah.
So there are times when I just like to throw my hands up in the air and say, Moff, just don't worry about it. But then I can't stop worrying about it. So,
Been too
it just,
involved. It's too hard to let it go.
yeah. My brain's is not wired like that, unfortunately. So yeah. Anyway, I've got a couple of other things on the go. I've got 20 tips in 20 minutes, which is a whole lot of tips on various things, on a new way of working, on ignoring soft options and that sort of thing. And I've been thinking I might send you a couple of booklets.
Oh yeah, I'm keen to have a look at that for sure.
Yeah, when
Since
you
I
can distribute them in your organization.
since I chatted to you last time, I interviewed Gordon Bray. So I asked him, told him how you telling me that you helped him get his house up Chatswood. Then he went into a lengthy story and told me about how he bought the house of his dad's friend. So it's one of his dad's friends, and he didn't know that when he went and approached him when he said, "Oh, I like that house," and you. Like, did he give you a cut of the sale of that house or anything for brokering the
No,
deal?
he didn't. No, he didn't. But I was just talking to him because he was a referee as well, And I was talking to him, and I said, "Oh, and he was wanting to know about the house that I bought and renovated." And I said, "There's one just down the road that's not for sale at the moment, but you should just knock on the door and see if it's for sale." And that's what he did, and that's where he bought it.
Yeah,
Um,
son is one
yeah,
of his father's.
Nelson Street, and Gordon.
Yeah, it's one of his father's friends. So that
Yeah, yeah,
served in the military with. So he would have fought.
yeah, yeah. It was an interesting story.
Yeah,
It's another interesting story. I was refereeing New Zealand Australia under 20s at the barracks there. You know where the barracks are in
Paddington. Yeah,
Paddington. And I think it must have been Jonah Lomo. I was in goal, and this guy, and I was moving to the right, and because I thought they were going to pass the ball, but this guy launched himself at the try line off the back of the scrum, and he hit me right in the head. So I went down like a sack of wheat, and I wasn't knocked out, but I was pretty dazed. And the next thing I know, Gordon Bray, who was running the line for me, was leaning over me saying, "Dave, are you all right? Can I award the try?" And I said, "I don't think so." Oh dear, that was a really funny episode
and
involving
Gordon
Gordon.
Gordon told me he had to finish off the game, didn't he? He finished it off because you were
Yeah,
too knocked around.
yeah, yeah. And so I mean, I never saw the try scored. So, back in those days, you could most likely have sort of said, well, was it a try? Yeah, okay, let's award it. But,
Yeah.
back in those days, it was, if you didn't see it, you didn't award
No TMO. It's all good. So that's how it should
it.
be. You go too much to TMO now anyway. So you've been involved in rugby for a long time and professional sports. So who are some of the outstanding players you've seen over your time you think really stand out as some of the best?
Well, Campese, obviously. He was on the end of a back line, which was superb. Liner, Campese, and then there'd be guys like Wilkinson and those sorts of people that changed the game. Jonah absolutely massively changed the way in which the game was played, and I got quite close to Jonah. It's sad that he's no longer with us. And from Kiwis, there are so many of other players, but it's very difficult because you've got to go right across the generations. That I've been involved in.
Robbie Deans was a handy All Blacks fullback too, wasn't he? Pretty sure
he was.
Yeah.
But Robbie's become a good friend, and we've been working on 11s together. So he's a magician of a coach, and he still has one of the best records, win-loss records in the professional era with Australia.
Yeah.
And nobody will ever bloody well own up to that. But he was a victim of internal politics, and that'll be forever what will hold Australian rugby back. And we're seeing it now with this chairman, and thinking he's been appointed as the executive chairman. Although he's gone a bit quiet recently, but he made it untenable for Andy Marinos to stay there. If you're a man like a man of principle like Andy is, and a good man, there's no way that he could have stayed in that job with that guy. And you see, he's just rolled Phil Waugh into the role, which
so so
I don't care. Another Nussman, another Shaw boy, and which is where McClennock went to school, where my son went to school. So I don't know.
Yep. You ever spoken to Hamish McClennock?
No. I couldn't imagine that I would have anything in common with the guy. He's got an ego that you can see from space. And when you do a bit of research into the guy, he's there are a few things about him that I would not be able to tolerate. Not the least of which was he thinks he knows everything about everything. So,
Yeah. I met a few of them. So.
Oh yeah. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I mean, he's there, so he's got to either bloody put up or shut up.
Yeah.
And so far, he's had a lot to say.
Yeah. Hadn't delivered heaps at the moment, but a bit of smoke and mirrors.
They're trying to win the PR war over in Australia. That's what it seems to me.
Yeah.
And
get the media on board.
And they haven't got the bloody product to back it up. That's the problem. It's all very well having tame bloody journos, on board, but if you don't back it up, I mean, the best thing for Australian rugby would be for them to beat the All Blacks.
Yeah.
And it could happen. It's happened in the past.
But been a long time since Wallabies won the Bledisloe Cup. I think you're talking about 20 years this year now. So,
yeah. Well, I think it's time that they put the Bledisloe Cup up every time it's played for. So so it would be up this weekend, and then if it changed hands, then it'd be up again the next time they play.
Like what happens with the Ranfurly Shield. Yeah.
It'd put much more interest in it, in my view.
Yeah. Well, make it competitive too. So it's, what's the point of holding something forever? So it kind of loses its importance.
They'll get it back one day.
Yeah. And David, thank you very much for your time. It's always enlightening having a chat with you. I love having a chat, and you're always just forthright and upfront, and just tell it how it is. I like that. You're going to have to make your house warmer and go and chop some wood or something like that before the snow comes in, or what's happening with that?
Well, we got the fire on at the moment, but it's not in my office here. So, oh dear. Duckman, great to talk to you, mate. So
Yeah.
we will catch up again, no doubt.
Absolutely, we will. So it's a pleasure always, and I look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Okay, mate.
Thanks, David.
Bye.
See you later.